So I said I wanted to just do a recap of the lessons, and I want to finish with one central idea that ties the whole quarter together. We've looked at all these one another passages. I did two things. I went back and I sort of looked at my notes and took some highlights. I started writing down things where I wrote down, I said the following. And I looked at what I wrote out and was looking to convince myself whether I was more convinced of what I had said now than I was when I said it, based upon what we have done together. And we're going to look at some of those as well. But the other thing is, I wanted to just put on one sheet of paper all of the one another statements. In our original outline, Wilson said there were 55 in lesson 1, 55 one another statements. I had another source that said there's over 100, and that's this one. So I was going to start accumulating these myself, then I ran across this on the internet, and I said, well, this is what I need. So Wilson did say that's not an exhaustive list when he said there's 55. So I think this one focuses on the use of the Greek word that from which we get the phrase one another. And I think Wilson was focusing specifically on those statements that are about our attitudes and our treatment towards one another. I mean, we could say, things one another. We all love blue. We decided amongst ourselves or one another that blue was our favorite color. Okay, that's how we can use the term, but it's not necessarily a statement of action or treatment towards one another. And these words kind of boil down. I think most of these, what are listed here as positive commands, using the form of the specific allelon for the Greek. I don't even know what that would have looked like written out. We've probably covered most of these already in the course of the quarter. We've probably talked about all these things at one point or another in each of the 12 lesson outlines that we went through. But here they are in all one place. The reason I wanted them all in one place, one sheet right in front of me without having to flip through the whole lesson book, is just to make an impact. Now, the other thing this can be done with is to tuck it into one of the front or back of your Bible and have it with you all the time kind of things. But the other thing it does is it just makes an impact when you think about how many times the Bible talks in this way. I said a couple weeks ago, I wasn't getting a lot of really strong agreement from folks that I think that this submission to one another, as we talked about. I mean, all of these things are in some sense requiring some level of submission. To have any regard at all for another person is to see to their well-being above my own. So how I treat someone will reflect whether my attitude is that their well-being is more important than mine, or I think my own well-being is more important than theirs. And so to accomplish these statements of how we are to regard from a spiritual standpoint, from a holy standpoint, from the attitude that Christ would have, we have to have as the root that idea of regarding others' well-being more important than my own. And I suppose there's times you have to draw that line and say, well, I need to take care of myself in order to take care of someone else. And I would admit there's some practicalities to that. But it's a lot easier to err on the side of, I do what I want to do because it's what I want to happen, than it is to err on the side of exhausting myself and doing for other people. Let's just be honest about it. But I keep going back in my head to this one idea of another study book years ago that we've done together and that I really enjoyed, which was a consideration of marriage and how marriage is an environment that God has created, instituted. If you don't like the word created for marriage, it is an environment that God instituted in which we learn how to love that which is unlovable. We learn how to love someone who hasn't earned or deserved our affection and submission. And I think that is kind of the thing I came out of with in this quarter, is that there's something really important in God's eyes about how we regard and treat one another, to put so much work into building a framework for teaching us how to do these things. And I say that because of, again, one of the first lessons. I guess it was lesson 1. I said, when we first got started, Christians who float from church to church and don't have a church family, I said those who conduct themselves in that way can barely, if at all, fulfill these admonitions of one to another. And I've decided to scratch the barely at all. We don't have a direct statement that says you must place yourself in the membership of a local church, because that kind of sounds like I'm making law where it doesn't exist. But I have concluded that if someone is to have regard for one another in a spiritual realm and believe they can accomplish this whole list of things that need to be done by every Christian without having an affiliation with someone to regard, is fooling themselves into thinking they can accomplish this. Who is my one another if I am not in your family? We had Hannah in town Thursday and Friday, and we decided to go up to 450 North for pizza. I took a picture of Allison and Hannah at the table, and I thought it was a good picture of them. And I sent it to these two over here, Jeff and Joy, because they're just right down the street. And I said, my girls are going to your place. Because at one time, they were running up there for pizza and sandwiches pretty regularly. I don't know how much now. But I said, we're at your place. And Jeff replied, I'm on my way, on the text. Now, he didn't show up. And I didn't figure he was going to. But I wouldn't have turned him away. But we dined together. And we enjoyed one another's company, and we had a good time together. And we would have had fun with Jeff there. That's not the point. The point is, who's my one another? Who am I taking to pizza if I don't have a family? And if it's a time for the family to be together, and I'm going to regard people with all of the things that are written out here, who am I regarding? Ephesians 4:15 and 16 capture this probably as easy as any one passage. And I am not going to have time to do all the material I've got here, I'll tell you that. Speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into Him who is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by that which every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. I mean, there are entire books written on church organization and how to grow the church and how to build the church. And it's all there in 2 verses, if we would just appreciate what it says. The building up of one another in all aspects of the truth in love. That sounds so simple. But that's talking about a palette of behaviors which say that my elevation of others above my own well-being or love is colored with nothing but truth. And so I know now what's unloving and what's loving. If I want to engage in ecumenicalism that accepts falsehoods, but is not supposed to then affect the relationship, that's not truth. But it's not love either. To deny someone a opportunity to be enlightened in the truth. But if my idea of how the church interacts with one another, or in particular leadership or the shepherds or others of influence, if it's in order to browbeat people into submission, and this is how you're going to live, then I have maybe the truth, maybe not, but I sure don't have the love. But right here is that we grow in all aspects to Him. It's an ordering of ourselves with Christ as the head, ourselves as the members, where we fit together and we're bound together or held together or glued together by that which every joint supplies according to the proper working of each part. So church growth and development, it doesn't imply it. It says it explicitly here, is about individual participation and individual growth and individual accountability within the body of Christ. What I don't want this quarter to be is, well, that was really a great study. And many of you have told me that this has been a really good study, a good source material for us to be talking about together. And I'm sure many of you keep your workbooks from classes that you've had and enjoyed. And, look in my office sometime. There's lots of dust. And a lot of that dust is right across the top of the books that I have put on shelves and I haven't touched since I put them there. But whether or not we handle the book is not my point. It's that, have there been things in this quarter that have caused us to consider how each part is glued together, held together, and working according to design function within the body of Christ? And I think that if you're looking for ways to say, well, what does that mean for me? What is my role in the church? Your role in the church is right here. My role in the church is right here. My role in the church is not shepherd. My role in the church is to build up. It's to honor others. It's to be like-minded. It's to accept one another. It's to admonish in love. It's to care for one another, serve one another, forgive one another, bear each other's burdens, have patience with one another, speak the truth in love, be kind and compassionate, to speak through song, to admonish through song, to submit to one another, to consider others better than myself, to look for the interest of others. That's my role. And that's when I read Ephesians and I think about, according to the proper working of each individual part, here is a really good gauge, a really good tool to say, well, what is the proper working of each individual part? It's funny about cars. You get a car, and Alice and I have talked for years about new car syndrome. You get an old car and you get tired of it, and it starts having problems, and it starts nickel and diming you. And once that switch flips in your mind and you go, man, I'm not doing one more repair on this car. You know, and some of you don't drive them into the ground like I typically do, but I'm not doing one more repair on this car. I'm going to get rid of it. And once you make that decision, then when you go to the car dealer and you sit there and you smell the leather seats and you go, oh, that's intoxicating, you know. But that car that has somewhat faithfully up to this point taken you wherever you wanted to go, whenever you wanted to do it, and you hate that car because it's got this problem wrong with it, it's got this thing wrong with it, it's got this thing wrong with it. And that's the new car syndrome. But cars can be tuned up. Cars can be refreshed and made to run again. That old Toyota that I had, that was Dad's car. I handed off the kids. We drove that thing for over 20 years. I couldn't get anyone to repair. I was offering them money, fix my car again, and they said, no, we're not going to fix that car anymore. That's a true story. I couldn't find anyone to fix my car. And I sold it for scrap. But I remember putting a new rack and pinion on that car at like 140,000 miles, 150,000. And that's back in the day when you didn't think about cars lasting that long, you know. But Toyotas, you know, you can't kill them. But I got that new rack and pinion on the front of that car, and wow, this car, that's like a sports car again. It really handles. I had gotten used to how flabby and unresponsive and harsh the front end was, where just a new rack and pinion, I didn't change out all the bushings, I didn't change everything, but that new rack transformed the way that car drove. And I had a new appreciation for Toyota engineering that I had lost because I wasn't doing proper maintenance. And these commands require proper maintenance. And without proper maintenance, we start looking at one another like those old broken down cars that we'd rather call Uber than drive that car one more time. I don't want a relationship with this car anymore. I'm selling it, I'm getting another one. Do people do that with relationships? Absolutely. People treat relationships like broken down used cars and say, I'm tired of investing in this relationship, or I've just neglected investing in this relationship so long that it needs tires, it needs brakes, it's going to need this and this. It's just easier to start with. Yeah, I know there's a new car payment and all that, but it's just easier to start over. I don't see any option for treating relationships like our relationship with old cars in the Bible. I said one could criticize that a study like this makes it sound like we're just all about love. Well, I'm sticking to that one. Andrew, would you like to talk?
Just with the analogy of that, getting tired of relationships and treating relationships like old cars that we don't like anymore. The reason that doesn't work in the church is because if we view everyone as something that needs fixing, we focus too much on trying to fix the problem with someone else. And, well, they have broken down parts and this part isn't working on them and this part
I'm the
isn't
broken
acting on
old
them.
car.
And we're broken down ourselves. We've got things that need fixing, but it's so easy to try to fix, someone else. I thought of a different analogy, and I was trying to come up with a clever way to make this, sound to stick in our minds. You were using the word glued. You kept saying glued together in Ephesians, where I think in the ESV, joined and held together by whatever joint supplies. But I was thinking about the idea of glue, and just if we ask the question, how sticky are you? Because there are materials that are very difficult to stick together. Some materials just really do not respond to adhesive, and you about want to get a staple gun or a nail and force them together or something. But how receptive are you to being joined to other people? And if we try to ask ourselves that question, how sticky am I? Not, well, this person just, this relationship just rolls off of me. It doesn't have any staying power. Well, this person, came into my life and then just drifted away, and there was no connection there. There was no lasting ability in that relationship. But if we can not assign the blame to something was wrong with them, and how can I be someone that relationships stick to me, and the bonds that I can form with people in the church stick to me because I make people want to stay in that relationship with me, and what can I control in myself that can make myself more receptive to those bonds and those joints lasting.
Oh, to use Andrew's analogy and combine it back with mine, this tune-up is not for the people sitting next to you, just to be clear. This tune-up is for me. I know my car doesn't have any say as to whether it gets new tires or not. That's my decision. But in the analogy I'm making, I am the one who has to tune up myself. And I have to give consideration to how much effort and work am I putting into being joined together with what every joint supplies. It's got to be my work to say, I am that person to which others can adhere to more easily and more beneficially for them. And we're drawn to those kind of individuals, aren't we? Aren't we attracted to people who do these kind of things? As opposed to the selfish and the prideful and the arrogant? We used to not be attracted to people like that. I don't know if maybe the culture around us is going through a phase where that seems to be popular, but I don't understand that either. So I have a hard time explaining why it wouldn't be that someone who's loving and compassionate and kind-hearted is more popular than someone who is arrogant and takes advantage of other people. 1 Corinthians 13:13 says, now abide faith, hope, love, these three. But the greatest of these is love. The chapter doesn't build this three-pronged pedestal very much within the context of the chapter. What it does, though, is builds the idea of love as being one of those pillars. But we would sort of take aback and say faith and hope. But the one that really endures is love. If we gave a quiz, I think a lot of us would answer what endures is hope, or what endures is faith, instead of love. And I don't know that I can explain why I think that's would be our answer. other than to say, I think in a lot of church history and a lot of tradition, we focus on teaching the relationship with Christ and the hope we have with God, and we have downplayed how God himself says, Christ himself says, it's the way that you love others is the way that I know you love me. I don't want to say we've downplayed it. I would say that I think it's important we give that more consideration and emphasis, because it goes back to the holding together, that bonding that is so necessary for church health. I won't say church growth, because you may say, well, we could do a really good job of that and our numbers wouldn't grow. And that's true. We could really be a tight-knit church that really looks after one another well and still not be growing numerically. But we'd be growing nonetheless.
I think traditionally, historically, we've done what we've always done, which is we look at what the denominational world, the world around us that calls itself Christian, has latched onto, and we've kind of run from it. I mean, Martin Luther did that with the Catholic Church and works. He ran the opposite direction, said salvation's by faith alone. We look at the world around us and see the emphasis of so-called Christianity being on love, and we run the other way and say it's truth. But as you've pointed out so many times in this study, and as is so important for us to understand, it's faith and works, it's truth and love, truth in love, in fact. In fact, I'm going to agree with you and say that every one of these are about love. And I'm going to go further, perhaps, I don't know, maybe you've gone this far, and say the entire thing is about love. We can run from it if we want to, but it's the facts. And the reality is you can't have love without truth. You know, you can have feeling without truth. You can have brotherly love without truth. But you can't have true biblical love, agape, without truth. Nor can you have the truth of God without love. The very basis of truth, the very basis of salvation, the very reason Jesus went to the cross is love. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. I mean, that's the whole basis of everything we are, and the reason we exist is love. And so when we love, we want to know and practice truth, and we want to share truth, and we want to be all of these things. And so it is at the heart of everything, and probably part of the reason why so then abide faith, hope, and love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. It's not brotherly love. It's agape. It is the looking out for the best interest or well-being of someone besides myself. God has been doing that from the beginning when he created us. In every aspect of the creation and everything that's come since, and now he calls on us to do the same thing. And that involves truth. But you have truth without love, and you've got, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, you might as well be banging a bunch of cymbals and making a whole bunch of racket, because you're not doing what God called you to do. It's all about love, and we can be uncomfortable with that, but we better get comfortable with it, because that is truth. I mean, that is the reality. That is what God has been saying to us and trying to impress upon us from the beginning.
You say we better get comfortable with that, Brace, and I hope that's what this class has been about, in that we've got to reject the world's definitions of words that we know the definition of. And we know the definition of love, and we want to be concerned that we use terminology that we agree upon how we're using it. But that in itself is not a hesitation to use words the way that God used words. When God talks about being asleep, what is he often referring to? The sleep of the body in death. So I shouldn't shy away from using that term as long as I'm clear with the definitions that I'm using this word in this context the way God used this word. He also said of sleep, many of you sleep. He's talking about death there too, but he's talking about spiritual death and not death of the body. God uses the same, or I'll say human translators use the same word that God uses that means two different things. But love always means love as 1 Corinthians 13 defines it, regardless of how the world wants to use it. And maybe our hesitation is as we've gone through the Victorian era and whatever, and we get confused that love and human sexuality are talking about the same thing. And maybe that bothers us, or that affection leads to sexual attraction, and that concerns us. You have to learn how to differentiate those two. They're not the same subject. They really don't have a lot to do with each other. Outside of the context of marriage, perhaps, they don't have much to do with each other. I said the humility is the key to the analogy of the body. And I think Romans 12, we looked at several verses there, verses 3 through 5, 10, 11, and 16, which seem to be all about, don't be so wise in your own estimation, verse 16 says. I like that because there's a modern phrase that sort of means the same thing. Don't be so wise in your own estimation. Means what? Don't think you're so smart. Don't think you've got it all figured out. Don't be so wise in your own estimation means there needs to be a healthy dose of humility in myself when I am discussing matters of, how to be acceptable to God. That's the theme of Romans 12. How to be found acceptable to God. A good, healthy dose of humility. I said delight in one another's presence, giving time as in a family reunion where you have shared culture and memories. I think that is so important for us in our working together is, I know I've got one knee that had major surgery and the other one did not. And sometimes that knee that had the major surgery, now going on 16 years ago, I just felt old all of a sudden. The knee I had surgery on 16 years ago, one ankle will swell and retain fluid much worse than the other one. And I've noticed when I neglect exercise and when I eat certain salty things and other factors, I will have more swelling than I should in my ankles. Okay, I'm talking to the right crowd here about swelling of the ankles. You guys know what I'm talking about. But I'm never confused as to why one ankle is more problematic than the other. Because there was a lot of tissue that was cut when I severed all of the ligaments on my left leg in 2007. There was major surgery. There was months of rehabilitation. And so this part of the inner working of the body and how it functions together and how it contributes, I know why my left knee sometimes doesn't contribute the way that my right knee does. And I don't punish my body because of that. I do what I can to accommodate the shortcoming in my left knee. Now, if my left knee was sinning, I would encourage it to stop. But my left knee is just broken. And there's a big difference. And some of us are just broken. And there's a difference. And if I don't know that you are nursing an old wound, and my expectation of you is unapplicable, because of the nature of your wound, then I've created a false expectation, and you've got a false standard by which to try to live. You may not even know it. You may not even be aware that I have a certain expectation of you. And I may not know of your injury, your brokenness. But you know what? You come to my house, you hear stories about what happened back in 2007. You hang around me long enough, I'm going to talk about those things, and you're going to talk about things, and we're going to know each other. Shared culture and memories, I think, are important to our one another fulfillment. I said Christ's greatest sermon was delivered in silent humility. Remember talking about how Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. And I said, this God-man is a mere hours away from the persecution and crucifixion that he is not looking forward to put it mildly. And he chooses at that time to get a basin of water and begin to proceed to wash the feet of the apostles. Some of our greatest sermons are delivered in silent service to one another and in humility. We don't like to humble ourselves. Jesus, who could have called how many angels? 10,000 angels to his aid to stop the crucifixion, to stop the Romans from taking him into custody, and to stop the sham trial, and to stop the scourging and the mocking and all of that. And instead, he's washing feet. And the world looks at that and says, that's crazy. And in a sense, that should astonish us too. That's crazy. That's nuts in a way, isn't it? Why isn't he fighting for it? Why isn't he assembling his army? Why isn't he passing out swords to all the apostles and saying, guys, man up, we're going to fight? It's crazy, but it's crazy because that's the love that God has. That he, through his Son, showed humility and service in how he treated one another. I said the trade-off to always being right is you have to be alone. And I think that's another point going back to humility. The trade-off for always being right is you're going to be alone. I said essentials. In essentials, there must be unity in the essential truths. There must be liberty, Ephesians 4. There must be, in opinions, liberty, Romans 14. And in all matters, love, 1 Corinthians 13. In matters of essential truth, there must be unity. In matters of opinion, there must be liberty. And in all matters, there must be love. I said humility isn't hiding your kindness towards others. It's understanding how that your kindness towards others reflects the Father. Matthew 5. Because the same place it says, don't do your works to be seen of men, also says, let your light so shine that others may see your good works and glorify the Father. So it's not about hiding how we treat one another. It's not about concealing our concern and our actions towards one another as much as it is, because that's what the text says, understanding how to make that be a reflection of God rather than a reflection of me. Okay. I said Galatians 6:2 says, bear one another's burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. I said there's never a short of supply. There's never a depletion of burdens. But bearing those burdens eases the load. As soon as we get one thing solved, something else is going to come up. So bearing one another's burdens is not about getting ahead of it and putting an end to all suffering and misery. It's about easing the load for others. I think it's that's Galatians chapter 6. I said love solves people's problems by being patient. And I said, never can I force you to submit to me. You can only volunteer it. Why won't they submit to me? You can't make anyone submit. You can coerce people. You can browbeat people. You can intimidate people. But you cannot make someone else submit. That's my decision to make. When I submit to you, when I arrange myself under your will, that's my decision. That's not yours. But guess what? You get to decide when you're arranging your will under somebody else. All day long, that's your decision. That's my decision. Those are the takeaways. Those are the things that I thought were important to mention in a wrap-up, that I'm going to try real hard. Although Wilson's book may go on the shelf and it may get a little dusty, I'm going to try real hard to keep these things from collecting dust. This has been a good class. I have really appreciated this study. I have really, really been impressed favorably by many, many of the comments that have been made from people who have more wisdom than I do. But we can talk about it all day long, or we can do it. We can do both. We can talk about it and do it. But let's not just be hearers of the word only. Let's be doers. I think that Aaron is preparing to take the class this Wednesday. There are books on the table. Some of us have copies already, so if you look at it and say, that looks familiar, don't take one. There's enough right now for each family to have a book, and we've got others ordered already on the way as well. So we don't want you short of opportunity to use that material. But those are on the white folding table right back to you.